The NBA offseason is about to heat up, and the Sixers are expected to be at the forefront of it all. We got another report regarding their outlook and why they may be pushing a particular rival about one of their star players that is on the market. In this video, I'm going to break down the Sixers' relationship with OG Anunoby, what this means for both the Sixers and the Knicks, and why I do think this is interesting moving forward. Now, I started this off mentioning that things are about to heat up. At the time of recording this, we have Game 5 of the finals tonight with the Boston Celtics holding a 3-1 lead. It does feel like a foregone conclusion that Boston is going to ultimately get that ring, which does hurt from the Sixers' perspective to watch that happen. And what that does mean is we're in full offseason mode. And based on the new CBA that was signed, teams are eligible to begin signing their own players immediately following the finals conclusion. So teams are going to start getting busy, and that's when we start to see all of these pieces begin to turn. Now, that is where the story begins today, is it has to do with the Knicks and OG Anunoby. As we knew, the Knicks made a kind of an all-in move during this season where they traded Emmanuel quickly, RJ Barrett, couple picks, and a couple other players to bring in OG Anunoby, who, to both of their credits, did look like pretty much the missing piece that team desired. Now, OG, one of the reasons that he was on the market is that he is going to be a free agent this summer and is expected to be. And it did not seem like Toronto wanted to pay him. He did want to get paid, and the Knicks seemed like the team to be that. So we have this report here kind of indicating the Sixers' involvement, which did surprise me here. This coming from Sixers Galaxy, originally by Michael Scotto here, and he writes, quote, "If the Knicks pay OG Anunoby well beyond $35 million, it's going to be because of Philadelphia, Oklahoma City, or another team with cap space coming in with a significant offer that forces the Knicks to exceed that." I think that could be around where you'd expect it, but if there's a curveball there and Daryl Morey comes in and throws a big offer at Anunoby that forces the Knicks to go over the top, I think they'll have to because of what they gave up in the deal to get Anunoby here. And that is the large conversation point, is the Knicks kind of already made the commitment and all-in move. And that was my personal hesitation for trading for OG Anunoby from the Sixers' perspective. It feels a little bit like the Tobias Harris situation, and we know how that turned out. Now, OG Anunoby is a better basketball player than Tobias Harris. I'm not arguing that point specifically. But when you think about the position from an organizational standpoint that the Sixers were put in, you made your all-in push that summer. And we're flashing back to 2018-19 here, where you invested all your assets, all the Dario Sarges, the Robert Covingtons, all these Landry Shamits and draft picks that you did have. Those were all flipped in exchange for both Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris. Now, in the Jimmy Butler experience, did not go quite as planned or as expected during that point in time, and he was dead set on making it down to South Beach. He did not want to re-sign with Philadelphia, which is a whole other conversation point there. The Sixers were stuck, that they had to sign Tobias Harris, and that is why he was inked to a deal that will age as one of the historically least valuable contracts that I've ever seen or the NBA has ever seen there. Now, OG Anunoby is not bad, but what he is a player that, you know, is more important to the Knicks than he likely is for any other team, and that puts New York in a really difficult spot here. And if you're Daryl Morey lurking over the shoulder trying to figure out the best way to make the Sixers better, it's to make one of your rival opponents pay a little bit prettier penny than would otherwise be the case. And by the way, I think Oklahoma City is just as legitimate of a threat here, as we also got this report saying that there's speculation OKC would offer him something in the realm of 2 years, $50 million, with an opt-out in the second year, which is something like Bruce Brown got. Now, again, I think OG Anunoby is better than Bruce Brown, and that those contracts are really interesting when brought up. I could see the Sixers going for some of those higher just price point contracts with the hopes of potentially flipping it. I know we've talked on here about that Bruce Brown contract and how that ended up being the missing ingredient or key piece from the financial aspect to getting that Pascal Siakam deal done, which obviously the Pacers beating the Knicks in the playoffs, getting it past that second round, it obviously should be considered a success at this point. Now, for the Sixers specifically, I do think a lot of this is just pushing the Knicks. I don't think there's that much genuine interest in OG Anunoby, and while I would take him, he's like option 6 or 7 as far as who they should be shooting for free agency. I know there's been a lot of buzz about LeBron James and Paul George. Paul George, to me, is the more legitimate storyline here, and I do think it's two-sided with OG Anunoby, that I do think he's a good fit for New York. I do think he wants to stick around, but we know that there is a business aspect of it, and that's kind of the dance that is being done. Now, to look at some of the free agents that are available, you see why the Sixers are pushing here, that obviously there are the names that we've spoken about, LeBron James, Paul George. There's the Klay Thompsons of the world, Tobias Harris, who can never be back under any circumstances. I don't care if it's a veteran's minimum. There's James Harden. We see how that experience went. Pascal Siakam feels like kind of a foregone conclusion that he will re-sign with Indiana. Guys like Gordon Hayward, who does not have much left in the tank. Kyle Lowry, not much left in the tank. DeMar DeRozan seems to be trending towards re-signing with Chicago. Buddy Hield, an interesting conversation to be had there. Bruce Brown, it seems like the club option will get picked up, and that Toronto's going to try and flip him there. Evan Fournier, not quite in the caliber of players we should be talking about here. D'Angelo Russell has his flaws and is on the player option. OG Anunoby on the player option as well, and then a guy like Gary Trent, who is very interesting to me. That is a name that I would like from the Sixers' perspective, but we'll see how all the money comes in at. And to mention OG Anunoby's contract specifically, there is a reason that he will be opting out of his player option, that he's due for $19.9 million on the books right now. By opting out, he's going to get a prettier penny than that. There is no doubt that he will get more than that contract. And I do think there's a chance where the Knicks are pushed into giving this guy a max contract. And again, I do think OG Anunoby is a good player. He's just a little more limited than I would feel comfortable when giving him that type of money. And I know there's plenty of concern about Paul George, but if you just want to call a spade here, I think there's a notable gap between Paul George and OG Anunoby as basketball players. And I know that there's different conversations. OG's younger, possibly more potential, although to be perfectly honest, I think his ceiling's a lot lower than people give it credit, that I just don't think there's that much polish on the offensive end. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy getting his own bucket and creating off the dribble in the way that we see Paul George. And to just dive into like what their stats are specifically for OG here with the Knicks this year, 14.7 points per game, 4.2 rebounds, 2.1 assists, 1.4 steals per game, shot 48.9% from the field, 38.2% from beyond the three-point arc, 46.3% of all his shots are three, 96.1% of his threes are assisted, shoots 45.7% from the corner. He's really automatic, about to turn 27 there, and 6'7". He is the archetype of player you look for and want on a team. It's just in my mind, I don't see the offensive polish. And again, this is why he's more important to the Knicks than he is for the Sixers. When you think about what Philadelphia is looking to bring in, it is that third option on the offensive end, a guy that is that traditional wing archetype. OG is much more, I believe, a complementary piece, that he can play his role next to guys like Jalen Brunson incredibly well. I think the third guy the Sixers are looking for, they want a dude to be able to just be able to hold an offense up to an extent, and that's what a guy like Paul George brings to the table. And to dive into his stats specifically and the difference there, 22.6 points, 5.2 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.5 steals per game, shoots 47.1% from the field, 41.3% from three. He's a couple inches bigger, just one from OG there. He is 34. We all know the age concerns. Shot the exact same from the corner. These two, 45.7%. 73.3% of his threes are assisted, and 47.6% of his shots are threes. So you can see there's a bit of a gap from a scoring standpoint there. And my selling point to Paul George is he is a guy that is a high-volume three-point shooter that is comfortable just being a catch-and-shoot floor spacing option. And there's more to him than that. That there will be situations where you can allow him to put the ball on the floor, to be able to be that driving force of an offense that he's proven capable of doing out there in Los Angeles, as he did in Oklahoma City and Indiana. We know who Paul George is at this point. I don't know if I know who OG Anunoby is at this point. I'm still kind of have my questions for what his overall basketball ceiling is as a player. And while he's still young and improving, I feel like we should be at a point where we have a little bit more of a concrete answer there. So I'm not saying the door is completely shut on OG Anunoby, but I do think it is quite clear that the Sixers' plan A is still Paul George. And I do think that this kind of flirting with OG Anunoby through the free agent rumor mill here is more about pushing the Knicks to spend more than they're comfortable than the Sixers' actual desire to get OG Anunoby. But to that same point, Daryl Morey is being wise here by keeping all doors open. You just have to make sure you walk away with one of these key players. OG Anunoby still sneaks his way onto that list and should be in the conversation, so it is worth extending that type of relationship, seeing what can come of it, and who knows, maybe that does end up being the Sixers' best option. And if that is the case, and that ends up being their clearest path to bring in one of these guys, maybe there is kind of a broken negotiations with New York where they're not willing, they draw a hard line in what they're willing to give them, and the Sixers might be willing to look a little bit deeper into it there. I don't think that we should be quiet on the OG front. I think there's a chance of it, but once again, I just think he's a lot lower in the pecking order. And once again, the Sixers should be looking to put the Knicks in as much financial trouble as possible. That the more we read about the CBA, the more restrictions that are put, there is a chess game for teams pushing other teams to spend in a way that I don't think quite applied to past CBAs. So we will see what happens there. I'm not ready to rush and buy an OG Anunoby Sixers jersey just yet. Once again, I do think Paul George is the better solution because of what this Sixers team needs. I get the youth. I get the defense. There's things to like about OG Anunoby, absolutely. But I do think there's a pretty sizable gap between Paul George and OG Anunoby as basketball players. And I think even as Paul George declines and OG ascends, I don't know if that gap is ever fully made up. So that's where I sit on that conversation here. I am in favor of pushing the Knicks to spend more money. There's no doubt about it. I do trust Daryl to work the margins and stir up some trouble behind the scenes, which seems to be more of where this report is coming from anything to me. But it will be interesting to monitor what those conversations are with OG up in New York. He's a guy that they clearly believe in, made a strong impact on their team, and I think it could potentially be a different story in that series if he does not hurt his hamstring and was capable of playing all 7 games to his full abilities there. We will never know the true answer to that one, but let me know what you guys think in the comments, both of that specific question and your thoughts on OG Anunoby in a Sixers uniform. I think if the Sixers believed as much as the Knicks clearly do, the Sixers would have gone out and traded for him during the season. That did not happen, and I do feel like it's a bit of a misboat because of that. So we will see what overall happens from here. Make sure you are smashing that like button on this video, dropping your comments below, and subscribing to Sixers Digest if you have not already. We got plenty of more content on the way because, as I mentioned, the offseason is officially heating up here. So appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in once again, and talk to you next time. Peace.